This is the Smart Buildings Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 417. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 417 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. In this episode, we are going to be going through a step-by-step guide for facility managers. So a lot of you in our audience looking at the analytics are facility managers and operators. That's a trend we've noticed is increasing. And in order to make sure we're bringing you some more content around topics that are pertinent to you, I thought it would make the most sense for us to start off by just creating a baseline from which we discuss building automation, we discuss cybersecurity, we discuss energy management, etc. So in this episode, we're going to be going through what a building automation system is, how to assess the needs of your facility. We're going to talk about selecting the right building automation system. That's a question that gets asked all the time. We're going to talk about developing an implementation plan for any retrofits. We'll talk a little bit about installation, a little bit about training, monitoring. There's a whole bunch of stuff in today's episode. And then what we'll do from this episode moving forward is we'll take each one of these topics and we'll break them into their own individual episodes. So this will be about at the 30,000 foot level right now. As always, everything will be available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/417. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/417. So building automation systems often get mixed up with control systems. And I want to take a second to kind of differentiate between the two. And then I want to talk about the parts and pieces and then why we would even use them. So building automation systems exist to provide a interface, ultimately a management interface of control systems. What control system? Specifically direct digital control systems, also known as DDC. So without giving you an hour-long history lesson on building automation and control systems, suffice to say, long time ago, we had these electromechanical and pneumatic systems. We still have them in some buildings. And then around the 80s, 70s, 80s, we started to see where microprocessors, computer chips, were put into supervisory devices and then controllers. If you don't know what supervisory devices or controllers are, don't worry, we'll get to that a little later in this episode. But these systems, right, these CPU chips were put into these controllers and supervisory devices. This enabled them to process data from sensors. So they were able to take traditionally analog data, resistive values from temperature sensors, pressure values, etc., and they were able to convert these into digital signals. So that's where this term analog to digital conversion comes from. And what that enabled you to do now was to take room temperature sensors, pressure sensors, humidity sensors, and to take those signals and convert them into ones and zeros, computer speak, for lack of a better word. That then enabled the controllers to have logic inside them, which was processed. And that's why they're called direct digital control, or DDC. This opened up the floodgates for all sorts of things. It opened up the floodgates for freely programmable controllers, for networked controllers, for the ability to visualize what was going on in your field controller without trying to walk over to a pneumatic accumulator. You were now able to take the data from these controllers and visualize it on a front end. Problem was, we needed a front end. Enter the building automation system. Building automation system, for lack of a better word, is a kind of hybrid mix-match of control system and visualization system. So in the beginning, you had these devices called supervisory devices, and supervisory devices existed to supervise the field controllers, which interfaced with your inputs and outputs in the field. So imagine this. You have a hospital with a bunch of air handlers, and you have these controllers on these air handlers. And the supervisory device would connect via a communication trunk to these controllers, and the controllers would connect via wiring to the inputs and outputs they're controlling. That's all well and good, right? So we've got all these controllers connected. They're mapped into these supervisory devices. Everyone's happy, but there's no way to visualize them yet. Enter kind of the server/visualization layer. Now, this has changed a lot, and we'll expand on it in a future podcast. But suffice to say, you had a server which would collect data from these supervisory devices, and you had a client which would enable you to visualize what was going on these supervisory devices and their associated controllers that are connected via the field bus. With me so far, it seems confusing, but it's pretty simple. At the top end, you have a server. It enables you to connect all of your supervisory devices together and then share that information to a visualization client, like a web browser or software running on a laptop. From the supervisory device down, it connects via field bus to all of the controllers, which then connect to their control devices, inputs and outputs. There's a whole bunch more to this, especially with like guideline 36, distributed control, edge devices, etc. We'll talk more about this in future episodes, as I mentioned. But for a facility manager, the building automation system now meant that you could, from a single location, monitor and control what was going on in your mechanical systems. Now, you'll see people say that building automation isn't just for mechanical systems, it's also for access control, lighting, etc. In my opinion, the people who write these articles don't really know what they're talking about, because if they did, they'd realize that pretty much every building automation system is primarily for HVAC control. Yes, you can integrate access control. Yes, you can integrate lighting, but it is typically integration. I will say, though, that there are management systems for those kind of things. Like you have PSIM, right? Physical Security Information Management. You have DSIM, Data Center Information Management. So you have suites of software that have that server and client functionality, but we're not going to really discuss those in this episode. So whenever you look at a building automation system, maybe you have one in your existing building and you're just not using it well, or maybe you're considering adding one. Or maybe you have a very old legacy system that you're considering upgrading. First thing you need to do, and we've talked about this in our retrofit episodes, is you need to go about, and actually I should check my audio real quick, just in case. Windows has been changing my volume settings lately on my mic, and yes, good. I'm not screaming at people. My team will be on Zoom calls and we'll be talking and they'll be like, "You're screaming at us." Like, oh gosh, it turned up the volume again. So anywho, first thing you need to do is figure out what you're working with. And this is where the assessing of your facility needs comes into play. There's a lot of ways you can do this, right? There's ASHRAE level 1 audits, there's energy audits, there's just general assessments, there's system scans, there's a variety of things you could do. Key point here is you have to know what you have, right? You have to know what you have. You have to know where it is and how you currently use it. So know what you have, know where it is, and how you currently use it. So maybe you have nothing, and that's totally understandable. Maybe you use electromechanical thermostats connected directly to air handlers, and you have no monitoring capabilities, you have no visualization, you have no control outside of manual control locally at the sensor. And maybe that's not okay. Maybe you are spending a lot of money sending your operators on weekends to go preset a temperature controller for a school. And that's inefficient. You're wasting effort and you need to fix that. That very well could be what is next, which is identifying the goals of the BAS implementation. What are your goals? Like, why are you doing this? Why are you putting a building automation system in your building? Why are you upgrading the building automation system in your building? Why are you changing the programming? Why are you changing the graphics? Why are you doing what you're doing? What is the objective? And this is going to become very important alongside with evaluation and budget considerations when we move to selecting the right BAS solution. Because what you'll see is there's BAS solutions that are meant for campus environments. There's ones that are meant for like ultra light commercial, big box stores, strip malls, etc. And there's stuff in between. So, and a lot of the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, the Johnson Controls, the Siemens, the Trains, the Honeywells, a lot of them have product lines that actually spread the gamut of those use cases. So we really want to understand why we're implementing the building automation system. Then we need to evaluate our existing systems and infrastructure. This I've discussed at length in our retrofit podcast. You can go to podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com and you can just search in the search bar retrofit, and you'll see many, many episodes where I talk through how to do a system evaluation. Suffice to say, you're going to go in there, you're going to grab any data off the existing BAS, you're going to grab your existing O&M, as-built, mechanical drawings, you're going to do an export from the BAS to grab the system hierarchy, what's online, what's offline, etc. And then based on that, you're going to look at your goals that you identified, and you're going to do a as-is to-be analysis. Typically, you're not going to do this. Typically, you're going to solicit a request for proposal, RFP, a request for design, a variety of different things you can request from contracting and system integrating partners that are out in your neck of the woods. Once you've done this, right, you've evaluated your systems, you've identified your goals, you need to really understand the KPIs of which you're performing. Like, is this lack of system control impacting uptime in operating rooms, which is one of your main cash flow generators in a hospital? Well, then that has a significant budget impact and should be considered when you're budgeting for what you need to do. On the flip side, if you just read an article online and it looks really cool and you're really excited about the technology, but there's no key metric, either performance metric or standard or some sort of local regulation that you need to adhere to, your budget considerations will probably be pretty low. So you got to consider that. What are we trying to do? How much impact does that have to our business? And then how much money should we assign to it? It's very similar. It's very similar to any kind of risk reward assessment. You do it all the time in the cybersecurity world. You go and you look at the potential for a threat, potential for impact, and then you say, based on that, we're going to assign this much value. And based on that, we can spend this much. So now we move to part 3, which is selecting the right BAS solution. So here it's largely dependent on what your goals are and what your existing system infrastructure is. If you've got a brand new building automation system and your goals are simply to better control your facility, you're probably better off investing in training than you are going and investing in major changes to the building automation system. Now, on the flip side, if you're maybe a remote school district, you haven't updated your building automation system in decades, everything's kind of falling apart, then it may make sense for you to look at a wholly new system. And if you're very far from local support, it may make sense for this to be a system that is remote support capable, which most systems are nowadays. The key features I look for in building automation systems really tie back to my organizational desires. So if I desire to self-execute, then I'm going to really look at the tool set. Is it an integrated tool set that's easy to learn? Does it have the flexibility in the tools itself, in the programming, graphics generation, et cetera, that I can customize and do what I need? And what level of customization do I need? A hospital is going to need different level of customization than a 3-story office building. So I have to start to consider what features really matter to me. And I know from experience that this is something that is often not considered near enough when people are building out their building automation standards and expectations for any retrofit or new construction work. Once I have those standards, I have those features, then I start comparing the systems and vendors. I'm going to look at, what is the cost to implement each feature, and then what is the supportive cost. So you've got your one-time implementation cost, right? This is the construction or retrofit cost. But then you've got the supportive cost. So if you want something, BAS system that's super flexible, maybe you have a building that has a lot of tenant changes, a lot of use changes, and you want a system that's flexible. Maybe you're going with a wireless system for that reason. You have to ask yourself, what is the support around that? Does the local contracting team know how to support a wireless product? Can I self-support if I so desire? What is the cost structure to make these changes? So you got to start looking at life cycle cost when you're comparing these different systems and vendors. You build a matrix, it's not too terribly difficult to do. If you're in a campus environment, or you're in an environment that requires you to have multiple bids, multiple potential competitive bids, and you can't flat spec something, then you have to look at compatibility. You have to look at scalability. What are the capabilities from an integration perspective? What is my team or the local contractor's capabilities around supporting integration and scalability? These are all important factors that you want to look at. And then really involve the relevant stakeholders in this selection process. Way too often, the people who have to operate this are not engaged in the conversation from a retrofit or new construction perspective. There's no standard that is developed, and most of the time, the decision is made on price and price alone, irregardless or regardless or irregardless. I don't know. I think it's regardless. No, I think it's irregardless. Who knows? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But not considering the lifetime cost of actually going and picking a vendor. That vendor may be low on the initial cost, but then there may be license charges. There may be that vendor's 60 miles away and there's huge truck roll charges. There may be a variety of costs that aren't considered, and it's really important to involve those stakeholders in that selection process to kind of suss out those hidden costs and those potential downsides. I'm going to pause here, see if anybody has any questions. We're about halfway through the episode. I want to see, is there anything I can clarify? I know I've kind of stream of consciousness on you for the past 20 minutes, giving you a lot of information to soak in. Like I said, each one of these is going to be an episode in itself that we're going to spend time on over the next several weeks. But I wanted to kind of level set the foundation here. So I'll check the different areas, see if anyone has any questions so far on anything we're asking, because unfortunately, I have to go to different social media things to see what people are asking, because the chat, for whatever reason, is not working on this software. So let me just check the usual spots. And it looks like we're looking pretty good across the board. All right. Go back to here and let's continue. So we've selected the correct BAS solution, and now we've got to implement it. And this, I like to say that the two areas that projects tend to fall apart, the first really is scoping, improper establishment of standards. That tends to cause a lot of things to collapse. In addition to that, improper project management, improper training, those tend to cause things to collapse as well. To get ahead of this, we really want to create a timeline for implementation. Now, if this is new construction, I'm not going to say timeline is unimportant, because it definitely is. We've all, or maybe you haven't, but I have, and I think a lot of our audience has been involved with those, data center or Amazon warehouse projects. That timeline is one of the most critical aspects, because every day that facility is not in operation, there is revenue that cannot be generated. So definitely consider that. And also, if it's a existing building like a hospital or a school or, a data center, something of the nature where it needs to be operational in order for the revenue generation to happen, timeline is very critical. So you need to consider that. And what I like to see people do when they're considering implementation is what are the upstream and downstream effects. So if I go and add a bunch of VAV boxes to a floor in a commercial office building, and that floor also now has a bunch of data center gear introduced to it, so it's putting off a lot of heat. And I haven't thought about that on the upstream effect of the air handling system that is in the building. And I haven't thought about how do we change sequencing? How is this going to impact our capacity, our tonnage capacity on the air handler? What is going to happen? These are things that need to be thought of. Once we've identified those risks, we've created a timeline for the implementation. We got to build out the roles and responsibilities. This is basic project management 101. But, you build out your roles and responsibilities in a matrix format of the team members who makes what decisions. You establish your communication cadence, which is incredibly important on retrofit projects. New construction usually has a pretty refined communication matrix. I don't like having to go through the mechanical and the GC to get to the engineer or owner half the time, but I understand why that process exists. But when it's owner direct work, it's often wild, wild west. It's just like, if you got a great PM, you're going to have an awesome communication plan. If you've got a new PM who's never done projects before, communication could be all over the place. And that could be a big problem, especially when you're trying to coordinate contractors. And then finally, and this is huge, absolutely huge, never see it happen enough. It should happen on every project, but it doesn't, unfortunately, which is rollback and contingency plans. So if you are operating a facility, you're operating a hospital, you're operating some other facility, I really, really encourage you to have some sort of rollback or contingency plan if something happens. I remember I was doing a community college in Texas, and the manufacturer I was working for rolled out a new version of the programming software. And I read the notes, and it said, doesn't change anything, nothing's different, not a big deal. I went and downloaded on a Friday, which is like the ultimate no-no, right? You don't go and download software updates on a Friday. It's just bad. You don't do it. But I did it anyways, because why not? It's Friday, and I like pain, apparently. So I went and did this and downloaded this central utility plant. I downloaded the version 5 to it. And next thing I know, I'm getting like phone calls to my phone, and people are telling me how the cooling tower is spraying water on the students as they walk by, and all sorts of bad things were happening because it changed the way that the valve tuning worked, and it was basically causing the cooling tower to overpressurize and spray water everywhere, and it was not good. And I had to fix that and roll it back. I did not at that point have a contingency plan. I just thought, oh yeah, what could go wrong? It's going to be fine. If I had a contingency plan, I would have had the older version of the software ready to go, and I could have quickly rolled back the controllers, rolled back the old software, and everything would have been good. Instead, I had to try to get someone to get me the old firmware so I could get that in there, and then had to try to rebuild the programming on the fly, which sucked. So yeah, contingency plans, very important. Now let's move on to installing and commissioning. Increasingly, so, as the largest vendor agnostic provider of training for the building automation space, you can imagine we get to see a lot of people come through our doors. And what we're increasingly seeing is more and more people who want to self-execute installation and commissioning. We're seeing, excuse me, the need to go and execute this in-house for a variety of reasons. People, the contracted costs are exceeding what they had budgeted due to inflation. They have pressing needs that they don't have the time to run through a procurement process, et cetera. So we're seeing more and more the need for the ability to install new systems and, more importantly, replace aging systems. So really start to think through this. Think through, am I going to be replacing those VAV controllers as they fail? Do I want my team to be able to, go and install inputs and outputs? Do I want them to be able to integrate systems? Like, at what point, what is your line of demarcation that you get outside services involved and that you do things internally? This is an internal discussion that varies from customer to customer. It often ties back to, do I have local support? Am I an established building that I'm not going to sell? This is a hospital or a higher education campus. It's not going anywhere. So it makes sense to have that internal talent because it reduces our overall cost to self-execute certain things. So you want to really go and focus on your installation services, your ability to do testing, your ability to do commissioning, and your ability to really kind of button up that final 10%, 20% of the project where things tend to get missed or not addressed. This would not be a Smart Buildings Academy podcast if I didn't talk about training and support. I mean, we are a training organization that trains a ton of owner, contractor, system integrators, and engineering firms across the globe. And I will tell you, from an owner's perspective, and I'm not just saying this because we sell training, I legitimately believe there is no better time to be investing in your key staff than right now. Because let's be real, utility costs are going up. Your labor costs are going up and they're unpredictable. And a lot of contractors and integrators are having trouble staffing because everyone wants bodies right now. Everyone wants talent. So the ability to self-support really gives you some control around your service response time, your operational costs, and your ability to make, minor changes to graphics, trends, alarms, controller replacements, software updates, things like that are of a reasonable skill level. I mean, it's not like you're going and programming some crazy, fan wall recovery unit thing that requires some complexity. Maybe you're just going and changing set points. Maybe you're clearing out alarms, modifying graphics, etc. So it's really important to baseline your staff, figure out what they do and do not know. We can definitely help you with that with our free online skill assessment. But whatever you do a role analysis. We help a lot of organizations with this. Like, figure out the key tasks that your individuals need to do. Based on those key tasks, then go and figure out what supporting knowledge do they need to do those key tasks, and then make a decision what makes sense for us to train and what makes sense for us to seek outside resources. Develop a training plan, and then more importantly, make sure that that training plan is aligned with your maintenance/troubleshooting program. And I use those words, maintenance/troubleshooting program, intentionally because you should have both a maintenance program and a troubleshooting program. Those are two completely different triage processes. Those are two completely different sets of processes. One is preventative, and you can use tools like analytics. You can use just standard processes based on time. You can put like totalizers on your fan and pumps and say, when they exceed X runtime, go and do a maintenance on them. But you should have a preventative and proactive maintenance and management program. And then you should have a troubleshooting triage program. And the troubleshooting triage program should exist, in my opinion, for three things. One, determine if it's a controls issue. And as you know from our shirts that we did for our veterans charity event back in February, it's always the controls fault. But in all seriousness, identify what is the cause, who do I have to dispatch, and then does it make sense for us to invest the amount of time to deal with this issue versus outsourcing it? So, you have to say, is it a controls issue? Most likely, if it's something to do with a set point or a configuration parameter, it may be. If it's a mechanical error or an electrical error, it's probably not. So you look at those and then you say, who has to go do it? And you look at your staffing level. Is it going to impact my ability to perform our core mission of our facility? So for example, if you live in the middle of, Nebraska, far away from contractors, and you're running a regional hospital with the only operating room within 100 miles, and the nearest contractor is also, 100, 150 miles. The operating room goes down due to some sort of control issue, maybe something locked out, something like that. Does it make sense then to have that staff capability to bring up that critical asset? Probably so. So in that case, you may decide, hey, I want to go and address this issue using our internal resources. Now, if you're in the middle of downtown Chicago, you've got a ton of different contract resources available to you. It's not a critical asset. Maybe, it's just some sort of pressurization control for a room. It may make sense to go and say, okay, we can delay this. It's not causing any problems. It's a little annoying whistling noise and a little hard to open and shut the doors, but we can get a contractor out here to fix it. So those are decisions only you can make. So to summarize all of this, building automation systems, they're pretty freaking awesome. I think they are. Otherwise, I wouldn't be running a training business solely focused on them. But at the end of the day, there's something that can really impact your life for the positive if you have a strategy. So I encourage you really understand. We've got a lot of resources at smartbuildingsacademy.com for you to look into guides, free webinars. We've got paid courses. Like I mentioned, those skill assessments you can dig into. But whatever you do, really understand the systems that are in your building. Understand how they tie to your facility's needs, both from a corporate governance perspective, any, standards and KPIs that are pushed down upon you, as well as a regulatory perspective. Then make the decision as to what do we need to improve? Do we need to improve anything? And from there, use a criteria. We have a great, it's like it's probably take you a good 50 minutes to read, but we have a really good article on our website called How to Evaluate a Building Automation System. It's got spec language and evaluation criteria built into it. Encourage you to go check it out. It's completely free. I think it's under our guides. So guides.smartbuildingsacademy.com, but don't quote me on that. And then, with that, work on your implementation, work on your installation and support, your training, your monitoring. And each one of these we're going to do an episode on in the very near future. I'll open up the floor to any questions. This is a live show. I do ask that if you are finding this valuable, please just hit that share button on LinkedIn, share it with your comments so other folks can find us. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you're on Facebook, do the same. And if you're listening to us after the fact, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes or on Spotify. That would be super helpful. We'd really appreciate that if you feel like we've earned that. That being said, I'm going to go through the usual places, see if we have any questions whatsoever. I'll give us a minute or two for any questions to come in. And check these places out here. And we'll check out here. I guess I have to hit play on LinkedIn to see if there's any questions. So there we go. All right. Nothing so far. I'm going to take a sip of coffee real quick. Thank you all for staying here. I hope this was informative. This is going to be a fun series. I feel like the core tenets of building automation and just using a BAS system for facility management are largely ignored in the face of all of the technology stuff, the sustainability stuff that really is kind of top of mind of everyone right now. But all of those concepts, cybersecurity, sustainability, net zero buildings, grid interactive buildings, they all depend on having a smart core building automation system and a staff to support that system. In order for those things to actually work behind the scenes. That's why jokingly, I would tell folks, first thing that usually happens on a smart building is that the smart aspects of the contract get removed from the project. Smart is often used to sell the concept to stakeholders, but then it's often removed out of the project, just due to either cost, logistics, or skill constraints, both on the owner as well as the contractor side of things. Man, that is good coffee. So not seeing any questions coming in. Like I said, if this is helpful, let us know. I really encourage you after the fact, if you're like, Phil, you really missed something wasn't clear, didn't understand it, just message us on one of our social platforms. Let us know. I'd love to be able to add that into our list of things. We've got a marketing person coming on probably within the next couple weeks. I think we're pretty close to that, but I mean, who knows in the game of life, right? That could all fall through. But I believe we will, and that's really going to help us in gathering this intelligence around what people want to hear, what we can do to help you learn more. Thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your Wednesday. I'll see you on Friday. Not quite sure what we're going to talk about yet, but I've got some ideas. Thanks a ton, everybody, and I hope you all have an awesome day. Take care.